She walked into the pawn shop on a cold afternoon. 63 years old. Coat too thin. Her hands shook. Not from the wind. From hunger. She had not eaten in 3 days. She set a sealed manila folder on the counter. She asked for $5. The pawnbroker looked down. He saw a red wax seal. He saw two words that should not be on his counter. Pentagon. EYS only. He looked back at her face. He knew that look. He slid a 20 across the glass. He did not ask her name. He only asked her to wait. Then he picked up his phone and made a call that would put her in a black sedan inside 2 days. What was in that folder would end 3 careers and almost end her life. If you've ever wondered what one piece of paper can really do, stay with me. The pawn shop sat on a corner 2 blocks from the Norfolk shipyard. The sign in the window said cash for anything. The man behind the counter was named Hollis Tate. 57. Former Marine. Tutor. He had owned the shop for 11 years, and he had seen almost everything walk through that door. He had seen wedding rings traded for rent. He had seen Purple Hearts traded for groceries. He had a rule he kept private. If a vet walked in hungry, the price went up. Not down. Up. He paid more than the thing was worth, and he never let them know. Ruth Calder did not look like a vet that afternoon. She looked like a woman who had slept under a bridge. Her gray hair was tucked under a wool cap. Her boots were navy issue, but the soles were peeling. She kept one hand inside her coat the whole time she stood at the counter, like she was holding her ribs together. When she set the folder down, she did it slowly. Like it weighed more than it looked. Hollis did not pick the folder up at first. He let it sit between them. He asked her if she wanted coffee. She shook her head. She said she only had a minute. She said she had to keep moving. He poured a cup anyway and pushed it across the glass next to the 20. She wrapped both hands around the mug, and her shoulders dropped about an inch. That was when he looked at the folder properly. The flap was sealed with red wax. Old wax. Cracked at the edges but still intact. Across the front in faded black ink were 3 lines. The first line said Department of the Navy. The second line said After Action. The third line said Pentagon/Eyes Only. Below those lines was a date. October 1998. And below the date was a case number that meant nothing to Hollis, but felt like it should mean something. He asked her quietly where she got it. She did not lie. She said it was hers. She said she had carried it for 27 years. She said she had meant to burn it that morning, but she had not eaten since Saturday, and the lighter would not light because her hands were too cold. She said she was going to take the $5 and walk to the diner on Granby and eat a grilled cheese, and then come back and burn the folder in his alley. She said she did not want him to read it. She made him promise. He promised. He lied. She drank the coffee in 3 swallows. She took the 20. She thanked him. She walked out into the wind. The bell over the door rang once. Hollis watched her through the glass until she turned the corner. Then he locked the front door and flipped the sign to closed. He carried the folder to the back room. He set it on the workbench under the lamp. He did not open it. He took out his phone. He photographed the seal from 4 angles. He photographed the case number. He photographed the date. Then he sat down on the stool and stared at the ceiling for a long minute. He was thinking about a name he had not said out loud in 9 years. A name that belonged to a journalist he used to drink with at a bar called the Raven on Colley Avenue. The journalist's name was Marlon Reyes. He worked the defense beat at the Virginian Pilot. He had broken 3 stories in the last decade that had cost admirals their stars. Holly scrolled to his number. He almost did not push the button. He thought about Ruth's face. He thought about the promise. Then he thought about the red wax seal and the date October 1998. He pushed the button. Marlon answered on the second ring. Hollis did not say hello. He said, I have something on my counter that I think belongs to a story you wrote in 2003. Marlon was quiet for a beat. Then he said, send me the photos. Holly sent the photos. Marlon did not call back for 19 minutes. When he did, his voice was different. Lower. Careful. He said, do not open that folder. Do not touch it again. Sit tight. I am driving over right now. And Holly's the woman who brought it in. Where is she? Holly said she walked out 10 minutes ago. He said she was going to a diner on Granby. Marlon was already in his car. Holly's could hear the engine. Marlon said, find her. Find her before anyone else does. Because if that seal is what I think it is, there are 3 men in the state who have been waiting 27 years for that folder to surface, and they have spent every one of those years making sure it never would. Holly's grabbed his keys off the hook. He locked the front door. He left the safe open and the cash register full. None of it mattered now. The folder was already heavier than the building. The diner on Granby had 8 stools at the counter and 4 booths along the window. Ruth was in the corner booth when Holly's came through the door. She had a grilled cheese in front of her. Half eaten. She was crying quietly. Not from sadness. From the food. From eating warm food after 3 days. She did not see him until he sat down across from her. She looked up. Her eyes hardened. She asked him what he was doing there. He told her the truth. He told her he had called someone. He told her that someone was on his way, and that someone wanted to talk to her, and that someone believed her folder was the reason she had been sleeping under a bridge for the last 6 years. Ruth did not move. She set the sandwich down. She wiped her hands on a paper napkin. She asked him one question. She asked if the person he called was government. He said no. He said the person he called wrote for a newspaper. She closed her eyes for a long moment. Then she opened them, and she said one sentence that Holly's would remember for the rest of his life. She said, then we have about an hour before they find me. She told him to pay the bill. She told him to walk out the front door, get in his truck, and drive around the block twice. She would meet him in the alley behind the laundromat on Plume Street. She said if he was followed, keep driving and do not come back. He did what she said. He paid the bill. He left a 20 on the table for the waitress. He walked out into the wind. He drove around the block twice. He saw no one behind him. He turned into the alley behind the laundromat. Ruth was already there, leaning against a dumpster, breathing hard, the folder pressed flat against her chest under her coat. She got in. She did not look at him. She told him to drive. He drove. He asked her where. She said anywhere with no cameras and no neighbors. He drove south, out of the city, past the marsh, toward a fishing cabin his father had left him in 1991. He had not been there in 2 years. The road to it was dirt, and there were no streetlights, and there was no cell signal for the last 4 miles. He thought it would be a good place to wait for Marlon. He thought it would be safe. He was half right. On the drive, Ruth started to talk. Not much. Just enough. She told him she had been a Navy intelligence analyst from 1986 to 1999. She told him she had worked in a windowless room in Suitland, Maryland, reading cables from places that did not officially exist. She told him that in the summer of 1998, a document went missing from her vault. A document that should not have been in her vault to begin with. A document that named 3 flag officers and a contract worth $400 million, and a country that the United States was not supposed to be selling parts to. She told him she had been blamed for the leak. She told him there was a hearing. She told him the hearing was sealed. She told him she lost her clearance, her pension, her marriage, and her daughter, all in the same year. She told him she had spent 18 months in a federal facility in West Virginia. She told him she came out in 2001 with nothing but a duffel bag and the name of a halfway house in Norfolk. She told him she had been within walking distance of the shipyard ever since, because she did not know where else to go. She told him she had been carrying the folder the whole time. Hollis asked her why she did not turn it in. She said she had tried. In 2002. In 2006. In 2011. Every time, she said, the man she handed it to ended up dead or transferred or suddenly very rich and very quiet. She said by 2015 she had stopped trying. She said she had decided to outlive them. She said it was the only revenge she could afford. She said she had almost made it. She said 2 of them were retired. The third was the chairman of a defense board that had just landed a contract bigger than the one in the original folder. Hollis drove without speaking for a long time. The road got narrower. The pines closed in on both sides. He asked her what her daughter's name was. Ruth did not answer at first. Then she said the name was Hannah. She said Hannah was 34 now. She said Hannah lived in Oregon and worked for a small nonprofit and had 2 kids she had never met. She said Hannah believed she was a traitor. She said Hannah had every right to. He asked her if Hannah had a phone number. She said yes. She said she had memorized it years ago and she had never dialed it. She said tonight, after this was over, she would. She said she had to clear her name first. Otherwise, the call would only make things worse. The cabin sat at the end of the road in a clearing surrounded by loblolly pines. The roof was tin. The windows were boarded. Hollis pulled the truck behind the cabin so it could not be seen from the road. He helped Ruth inside. The air smelled like dust and old wood smoke. He lit a kerosene lamp. She sat on the cot in the corner and finally let go of the folder. She set it on the table and slid it across to him. She said, "You already broke the promise. You might as well read it." He did not touch it. Not yet. He boiled water on the propane stove. He made her tea from a tin he found in the cupboard. He gave her a clean blanket. He told her to sleep for an hour. He would keep watch. She lay down. She closed her eyes. Within 90 seconds, her breathing slowed. She had not slept indoors in 19 days. The kerosene lamp made a soft circle on the table. Outside, the pines moved in the wind. Somewhere far off, a barred owl called twice and stopped. The cabin felt, for the first time in either of their lives, like a place where nothing bad was going to happen. That feeling lasted 40 minutes. At 6:14 in the evening, a pair of headlights came down the dirt road and stopped at the gate. Hollis saw them through a crack in the boarded window. The headlights were too high off the ground for a regular car. The vehicle was matte black. There was no front license plate. The driver did not get out. The engine kept running. A second pair of headlights came up behind it and stopped. Then a third. 3 vehicles. No sirens. No voices. Just the soft growl of 3 idling engines 100 yards from the cabin door. Ruth was already awake. She did not ask what was happening. She sat up on the cot. She put her boots on. She picked up the folder. She looked at Hollis. She said one word. She said basement. He stared at her. He told her the cabin did not have a basement. She told him it did. She told him to lift the rug under the table. He lifted it. There was a trap door. Hand cut. Older than the cabin. His father had never told him. She said her brother had built it in 1982 for moonshine. She said her brother had been a friend of his father. She said the world was smaller than people thought. They went down. The ladder was 8 rungs. The space below was the size of a closet. Dirt walls. A single dim bulb wired to a marine battery. A folding chair. A jug of water. A radio. Ruth sat on the chair. Hollis pulled the trap door shut above them and slid the rug back across with a length of fishing line his father had rigged for that exact purpose 40 years earlier. Above them, footsteps came up onto the porch. 3 sets. Heavy. Unhurried. Men who knew the cabin was empty and were taking their time anyway. If you're still with me, hit that subscribe button. The footsteps moved through the cabin slowly. They stopped at the cot. They stopped at the table. They stopped over the rug. One of the men said, "The kettle is still warm." Another said, "She cannot have gone far." The third said nothing. He walked back to the door and stood in the frame. Hollis could see his shadow through a crack in the floorboards. The man pulled out a phone. He spoke quietly. He said, "The asset is mobile. We need the South Road covered. We need the bridge at Pungo covered. We need eyes on the pilot newsroom." He listened. Then he said, "No, sir. No body yet. We are still looking." He hung up. The three men left the cabin. The engine started again. Two of the vehicles drove south. One stayed at the gate. Hollis and Ruth waited in the dark for an hour and 12 minutes. Ruth did not move. She breathed through her nose. She kept the folder flat against her thighs. Hollis kept his hand on the ladder and watched the strip of light at the edge of the trap door. The strip of light did not change. Eventually, the third engine started and rolled away down the dirt road. The cabin went quiet again. They did not come up right away. Ruth said the cabin was burned now. Even if the men left, someone would come back. Someone would watch it for days. She said they needed to walk out. Through the woods. To the river. There was a fishing dock 2 miles east. Her brother had kept a small John boat tied there in the 80s. She did not know if anyone still used the dock, but she knew the river ran north into the Lynnhaven, and that the Lynnhaven ran into the bay, and that the bay had 1,000 places to hide a small boat. Hollis did not argue. He climbed up first. He listened at the trap door for 2 full minutes. He pushed it open. The cabin was empty. The kerosene lamp was out. The kettle was cold. The window had been pried open at one corner. Nothing was taken. They had not come for things. They had come for her. He pulled Ruth up. He grabbed a wool coat off the hook by the door and made her put it on over her own. He grabbed a flashlight, a hunting knife, a half loaf of bread, and a canteen. He left everything else. They walked east through the pines. The ground was soft. The moon was low. Ruth did not use the flashlight. She walked the way a person walks who has been hunted before. She put each foot down slowly and waited for the sound before she shifted her weight. Hollis followed her. He was a Marine, but she was the one who knew this kind of walking. She had been doing it, in one form or another, for 27 years. The river was where she said it would be. The dock was rotting, but it held. The John boat was not there. In its place was a fiberglass kayak chained to a piling with a combination lock. Ruth knelt at the lock. She turned the dial. 4 numbers. The lock clicked open on the 3rd try. Holly stared at her. She said, "My brother always used the same combination." She said her brother had died in 2017 of a heart attack at his kitchen table, but his kayak was still here, and she still knew the combination, and that meant something to her, even if she could not say what. They put the kayak in the water. 2 paddles were strapped to the deck. Ruth got in the front. Hollis got in the back. They pushed off. The current took them north. The water was black and the sky was black, and the only sound was the dip of the paddles and the soft hush of reeds along the bank. Somewhere behind them, 3 vehicles were searching dirt roads for a woman who was no longer on dirt. Marlon Reyes was at the cabin 20 minutes later. He had gotten Hollis's last text from the diner, and he had driven the route Hollis described. He found the broken window. He found the cold kettle. He found a single sheet of paper on the table that had not been there before. The paper was torn from a pocket notebook. 3 words were written on it in pencil. The words were River North Roanoke. Marlon stood in the cabin for a long time. He understood the first 2 words. He did not understand the third. He took a photograph of the note. He left the cabin. He drove back to Norfolk with his hazard lights blinking, and he called every contact he had at the pilot online, at the AP wire, and at a small public radio station in Hampton. By midnight, the story had a shape. Marlon had pieces. He had Holly's photographs of the seal. He had the case number. He had the date. He had a source at the Naval Historical Center who confirmed, off the record, that a file with that number had been declassified for 4 hours in 1999, and then reclassified with a notation that the original had been reported destroyed. Reported, not confirmed. Marlon understood what that meant. The original had not been destroyed. The original had walked out of a vault in 1998 in the coat pocket of an analyst who had been told she was going to be the fall guy. The kayak reached the mouth of the Lynnhaven a little after 2 in the morning. Ruth was shaking from the cold. Holly steered the kayak toward a stand of cattails and tied it to a stump. He pulled Ruth onto the bank. He wrapped her in the wool coat. He gave her bread and water. He told her she needed to rest. She refused. She said the word Roanoke. She said it 3 times. He asked her what was in Roanoke. She said a woman. She said the woman was the only person left alive who had been in the room when the document was leaked. She said the woman had been a Navy stenographer. She said the woman lived in a trailer outside Roanoke Rapids, North Carolina, and that the woman had a transcript. A second copy. Not of the document. Of the conversation around it. Of the 3 flag officers, by name, agreeing in real time to a deal that was illegal under 4 federal statutes. Holly's understood. The folder was one weapon. The transcript was the other. Together they were a verdict. Apart they were just paper. They had to get to Roanoke Rapids. They had to do it before the men in the matte black vehicles understood what Ruth had been carrying north for, and they had to do it without using a credit card, a phone, or a license plate that could be traced. He looked at her in the dark, and he asked her how she planned to cover 240 miles with no money and no car. She looked back at him. She said, "You have a truck." He said, "Yes." She said, "Your truck is at the cabin, and the cabin is being watched." He said, "Yes." She said, "Then we steal one." He stared at her. She said, "I have stolen worse things. We will give it back." They walked along the shoreline for an hour. They came to a marina with a chain-link fence and a parking lot of pickup trucks belonging to weekend fishermen. Ruth picked the oldest one, a 1994 Ford Ranger with a busted tail light. She said the old ones were easier, and the old ones were less missed. Holly's did not ask how she knew how to start it. She did it with a hunting knife and a length of copper wire she pulled out of the kayak rope. The engine turned over on the second try. They drove south at exactly the speed limit. They drove past the bridge at Pungo. They saw the matte black vehicle parked at the toll booth. The driver was looking at every car going north. He did not look twice at an old Ranger going south. They were past him before he finished his coffee. They drove for an hour without speaking. The radio did not work. The heater did. Ruth held her hands over the vent and did not move them for 30 miles. Outside, the trees thinned and the land flattened. The sky in the rearview was gray. The sky ahead was darker. Holly's watched the dark, and he understood a storm was coming. He could smell it the way men who grew up near water can. The air had that flat metal taste that meant cold rain inside the hour. Ruth saw it too. She told him to push the truck. He pushed it. The Ranger shuddered at 65. The wipers were dry-rotted. The defroster only worked on one side. They crossed into North Carolina a little after 4 in the morning. The first lightning split the sky over a soybean field. The rain came 2 minutes later. It came sideways. The road disappeared. Holly slowed to 20. Ruth said, "Do not stop." She said the men they were running from would not stop in this weather either. She said the storm was the only thing on their side, and they had to ride it as long as it lasted. The storm followed them into the pine flats outside Roanoke Rapids. The wind shook the truck so hard the side mirror peeled back against the door. A tree came down across the highway 40 yards ahead of them. Hollis cut the wheel and put 2 tires in the mud and went around it and came back onto the road with the rear end fishtaling. Ruth braced the folder against her chest and did not make a sound. The lightning kept up. The rain kept up. By the time they reached the trailer park at the edge of town, the truck was running on fumes and Hollis was running on coffee that had gone cold 3 states ago. The stenographer's name was Lorraine Beach. She was 81. She lived in a single wide trailer with a sagging porch and a wind chime made of spoons. The porch light was on. The screen door was unlocked. Lorraine answered the inner door in a flannel robe and slippers, and she did not look surprised to see them. She looked at Ruth for a long beat. Then she said, "I always knew you were still out there." Then she said, "Come inside before the lightning finds you." She gave them dry towels. She made coffee. She did not ask about the folder. She did not have to. She walked to the back bedroom and came out carrying a brown grocery bag. Inside the bag was a reel of magnetic tape and a stack of typed pages bound with a rubber band. She set it all on the kitchen table next to Ruth's folder. She said she had been keeping it for 27 years and that she had been waiting for someone to come and take it off her hands so she could finally die without the weight of it sitting under her bed. She said her husband had passed in 2019, and the tape had been the only thing left in the house that still scared her. Marlon Reyes called Hollis's burner phone at 6 minutes past 5 in the morning. Hollis answered. Marlon said he had a meeting set with the Inspector General's office at 10. He said he had a federal judge willing to take the evidence into protective custody at 9. He said all he needed was for Ruth to be in his office at the Pilot building by 7:30. He said he had a route. He said he had 2 retired agents he trusted as escorts. He said the matte black vehicles had been spotted on every major road into Norfolk, but not a single one on the back roads through the dismal swamp. He said the swamp was their way home. They left Lorraine's trailer at 5:30. The storm had only moved, not stopped. The lightning was now over the swamp. The rain was steady. Hollis drove. Ruth held the folder and the bag of tape. The ranger climbed a state road that ran along an old logging cut. The trees on either side were 200 years old. They had outlasted 3 wars. They had outlasted the men in the matte black vehicles by a century. Ruth looked at them through the rain, and she said she had not seen trees like that since she was a girl. She said her father had taken her camping the summer before he died. She said wind through wood that old was the only sound that ever made her feel small in a good way. They were 40 miles from Norfolk when the 3rd matte black vehicle found them. It came up the logging road behind the truck with its lights off. Hollis saw it in the side mirror and he knew. He cut hard onto a fire road that he had fished on as a boy. The fire road was mud. The vehicle followed. The fire road dropped into a hollow. A creek ran across it. The creek was swollen from the storm. Hollis hit the creek at 30 miles an hour, and the truck plowed through and came out the other side coughing. The matte black vehicle, lower to the ground, hit the creek and stalled. They watched in the side mirror as the driver got out and stood in the water up to his knees and put both hands on his head. The storm broke as they crossed the city line. The sun came up over the Elizabeth River. Marlon was waiting in the parking garage under the Pilot building. 2 retired federal agents were waiting with him. They took the folder. They took the tape. They took the typed pages. They put Ruth in a clean coat and walked her into the federal building 4 blocks away, while the press photographers Marlon had quietly tipped off recorded every step. The hearing was not sealed this time. 3 flag officers were named on the front page within 48 hours. 1 resigned. 1 was indicted. The 3rd drove his car off a bridge 2 weeks later and was pulled from the water alive and never spoke in public again. Ruth's record was vacated by a federal judge. Her pension was reinstated retroactive to 1999. The back pay covered a small house on a quiet street with a yard big enough for a garden and a dog. She called Hannah from the kitchen of that house on a Sunday in late spring. The phone rang 4 times. A woman answered. Ruth said her name. There was a long silence. Then Hannah said, "Mama." Then Hannah was crying. Then Ruth was crying. They talked for 2 hours. Holly sat on the back porch and listened to the wind in the dogwoods his father had planted in 1968. The folder was gone. The tape was evidence. The men who had taken 27 years from a Navy analyst were gone too. What was left was a woman, a yard, a dog, and a phone call that should have happened a long time ago. Sometimes one paper is enough. Sometimes it just takes the right hands to hold it long enough to set it down.